that an ultimatum would actually help workers come back to work. I think that was the context in which we came to an agreement. There was hope that the ultimatum may bring workers back to work. For fear of being dismissed, yes.
If the security problem wasn't solved, then there was another fear. And the fear would be that if they did come back, some of them, in answer to the ultimatum, they might have been killed. So surely it would only have been responsible to have issued the ultimatum in the light of the policy that you'd already discussed with Mr. Schaskes and conceded to be the case on Tuesday. Surely it would only have been responsible to have issued that ultimatum if you had known that the security problem would be over by Friday. What do you say to that?
I agree with that, Chair. As I said, the sentiment was the ultimatum may come across as we're going to be fired, let's go back to work. That was the spirit in which this ultimatum was issued.
But my interest is in something else, and it's the point that the Chair's just put to you. You as Lonman knew it wouldn't be fair to ask workers to come back to work unless you knew it was going to be safe for them. How did you know at 6:30 in the morning on Thursday that by the next day it was going to be safe for workers to return to work?
Chair, I have absolutely no context of this one line from Mark. I'm trying to say...
Well, let me... I know that's what you say, but let me put another concern that I have in this regard to you. Quadruple W4 is a list of cell phone calls between General Mbombo and yourself over the period 14 to 16 August. And what we see there is that at 15 August, at quarter past 8, or 20:16:26, General Mbombo took a call from you that lasted for 30 seconds. She was at a meeting of the National Management Forum at that stage, which was possibly already over, and she was possibly going to move into what the SABC call an extraordinary session after that meeting. She took a call from you for 30 seconds. The SABC version is at the extraordinary session that took place shortly after she took that call. The decision was taken that SABC were going to move in the next day. Did she not convey that to you in the 30 seconds that you spoke at 8:15?
Absolutely, Chair. I have had no conversation with General Mbombo on what they were going to do the next day and all this. I did not discuss anything, or she did not tell me anything about what was going to happen.
You phoned her?
Now, that MTC means I phoned her.
Yes, as I said, you phoned her. Why?
Yes.
What for?
I have no idea, Chair. I've had several...
possibly, I can possibly assist you in that regard, Mr. Mokoena. She tried to phone you 3 times between 1:45 and 2:12 early in the day. Those MOCs that all last 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 3 seconds looked to me like 3 attempts by her to call you, which didn't succeed, which reached your voicemail. So I suspect that when you phoned back at 2016, you were possibly trying to get back to some missed calls.
That's very possible, Chair.
Well, you say she didn't say any of that. She didn't tell you what SABC were going to do.
No, not a single police official ever told me or described or presented or explained any of their plans except generic information about reinforcement. I was not privy to any of the details.
And you don't know how anyone in Lonman would have known by 6:30 a.m. that it was going to be safe for workers to return the following day?
I don't know how Mark would have arrived at that decision.
You see, what does strike me as strange about it, Mr. Mokoena, is we've looked at General Mbombo's full cell phone records. And what we can tell you is that between 8 p.m. on Wednesday the 15th and 6:15 a.m. on Thursday the 16th, she had a number of calls to senior police officers. But the only other people to whom she spoke were yourself and Mr. Sinclair. Only other people to whom she spoke.
I do not deny that. As I said, I'm not aware of any conversation I had on the telephone with her that she would have presented to me, explained to me about their plans. I
told you what their plans were on the Tuesday.
Not at all, Chair.
According to the transcript, she told you we're going to have to act tomorrow. She also told you they had a plan to encircle the strikers. That's the beginning of the transcript. I think she actually said it in your hearing.
Yes.
Over the telephone to the National Commissioner. So certainly you were privy on the Tuesday to what their plans were, and that the Provincial Commissioner was proposing to act on the Wednesday morning. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, the police.
That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, it is correct, Chair, that the police reinforcement, the cycling, that was generic information that we received as feedback at EXCO through Mark Monroe, whose security Sinclair was reporting to. So I had that type of information about reinforcement in cycling from EXCO.
We also know that Lonman knew the details of that plan because Ms. Ncube sent an email to Mr. Ramaphosa setting out what the plan was going to be. She used the expression corralling. They were going to corral. Was she on EXCO?
Yes, she was.
So she knew, and she conveyed that to Mr. Ramaphosa. So we know what EXCO knew already on the Tuesday.
Yeah.
They knew the details of the plan that was on the table. It was going to be implemented. Presumably, it was envisaged might be implemented at that stage. And then you knew from what you heard the Provincial Commissioner say to the National Commissioner in your presence on the Tuesday afternoon that her intention was to go in the next morning.
Yes, and Chair, by the way, the Provincial Commissioner at the press conference was asked by media what the detail of the plan was, and I was present in that meeting, and she did not divulge it. So it is correct that I knew generic information like other EXCO members, reinforcement, that they were going to encircle, but as to the detail of what's going to happen on the day and all that, I didn't know. Even to date, I have had no access to those plans.
But of course, from Lonman's perspective, you didn't need to know what the details were to know that it would be safe. All you needed to know is that the police were going to move in.
Yes, she actually confirmed that they were going to move in and they were going to disarm the workers at the COP.
Yes, that was at 9 o'clock.
Yes,
but Mr. Monroe sends an email that suggests he knew it at 6:30.
Chair, that's why I said Mark may have had other information I didn't.
I understood you to suggest that Mr. Monroe might have heard that from Mr. Sinclair,
yes,
who reported to him.
Yes.
And so we know also, I think, that Mr. Sinclair was in contact with various police officers.
Yes.
So it's an inference that you ask us to make, I take it.
Yeah.
So that Mr. Monroe probably got that information from Mr. Sinclair, who got it from the police. You say you didn't get it yourself.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
And the cell phone records show that the Provincial Commissioner called Mr. Sinclair after the end of the extraordinary session of the National Management Forum. I can get the exact time. It's around about 11 o'clock at night. 11 o'clock at night. Well, for the record, I will get the exact time. But one last issue flowing from this. On the Tuesday, the Provincial Commissioner also wanted Lonman to coordinate its activities with SABC. It wasn't just that SABC wanted to, that Lonman wanted to coordinate its activities with SABC. SABC also wanted that. Can I take you to page 6? Of that transcript. This comes, you may recall she was talking about possibly moving in this evening, but possibly not, and waiting until tomorrow. And then she says, getting 480 members tomorrow, when we go there for a second time now, that we were there today, they did not surrender, then it is blood. So I want us to be in a position to say, whilst you're saying you will call them or you will allow us to give, but tomorrow they must be told that the company expects them to be at work. So she wanted your ultimatum to be issued in a manner that was coordinated with the SAP's action. You recall that from the meeting?
Yes, I recall that.
And in fact, through that meeting, she was urging you to take a hard line with the striking workers, was she not?
Yes. My experience of both General Mbombo Chair and Pembe throughout were asking us to do our job, which was an IR job. They insistently said, Bernard, you must do your IR job and sort out this matter. So they were persistent and were very clear that we needed to do our part. And my communication with her and General Pembe was, we will try to do our best, but also you do your part as police. So yes, it is correct.
But there may have been a difference in the attitude between General Mbombo and General Mpembe. I can't speak for General Mpembe at this stage because I think that his attitude was possibly a bit more nuanced. But General Mbombo didn't just want you to do your job. She wanted you to do your job in a particular way. She wanted you to take a hard line on the strikers. Would you agree with that?
I didn't experience that, Chair. I thought she was asking me to do my job as a company in terms of employees and unions.
Well, first she asked for the company to give an ultimatum to be coordinated with the police action. We've just seen that passage.
Yes, and in that conversation, Chair, you will notice that I said I don't want to do anything that could compromise the work of the police, and the police, on the other hand, should not do anything to compromise our work in terms of IR. And I think that was the context of our conversation in terms of coordination, that I don't want to do anything, General, that's stupid, that tomorrow, you will blame management. And also, whatever you do, just make sure that it doesn't upset our IR relations. That was the context of my conversation with General Mbombo.
Yes, but the General, I want to put to you, didn't want you to talk to the strikers, didn't want you to give leeway to the strikers. Would you accept that?
I'm not sure I picked that up, Chair.
Well, let's go to page 8. You may remember this passage because she put to you this rather strange proposition, which apparently was also entertained by the Minister of Mining, that management were actually using this sort of situation to get rid of NUM. Page 8. You see, I want us to, you remember last night, AB and I raised this thing that we're dealing with Impala. We had lots of allegations and rumors, and some of these allegations, they were pointing to the management, that the management is colluding with AMCU and so on and so forth. Over the page, of ourselves not being comfortable in terms of understanding whether the Impala mine management really is colluding with the mine, or I think she means the union there, meaning AMCU, but also remember from a political point of view, there was even this feeling that, the mining sector wants to replace NUM, with a new face.
Sorry, I think the paging is different from my... let me find it.
Oh, sorry, it's page 8. 8 and 9. I beg your pardon.
Passages that are being read to you are pages 28 and 29 of your bundle. Look at page 28 of your bundle. This is the second proofread version. It's page 9 of the second proofread version. And around about 3/4 of the way down the page 28 of your bundle, the Provincial Commissioner starts, you see, I want us to remember last night, AB. And that's the passage Mr. Chassis has put you, and it goes over the page. That's correct, Mr. Chassis.
That is correct. Mr. Mokoena, have you got the passage in the transcript? It's the original page 8 of the transcript. I understand it's page 28 of your paginated bundle. Page 27 of your paginated bundle. And you see SAP's commissioner.
Okay, I got it.
I beg your pardon. It's my fault. I'm working with the wrong document. I'll just work on Ms. Pilley's screen. Paginated 28. You see, you remember last night, AB, I raised this thing that when we were dealing with Impala, we heard a lot of allegations and rumors. And some of these allegations, they were pointing to the management. that the management is colluding with AMCU and so on. Then over the page, at some point ourselves, we were asking ourselves questions to say, but these rumors that we're getting, these issues that are being said, they might find truth somehow, because we're looking at how the management was moving forward in terms of taking action. In terms of, because we believe is that whether there is this unrest now. No, I've lost my.
In the middle of the page, he talks about whether the Impala mine management really is colluding with this mine, or to take it should be with this union. And then he goes on about the mining sector wants to replace NUM.
Thank you, Chair. So at the end of the day, when we're dealing with these issues, we ended up ourselves not being comfortable in terms of the understanding whether the Impala mine management really is colluding with this mine. But also remember, from a political point of view, there was even these feelings that, the mining sector wants to replace NUM, with a new face. And maybe that's why these things are erupting. So I want us. So I think yesterday, Abi will recall, you'll recall when this discussion with the National Commissioner came, she also, from the discussion she raised with you, some of these questions that she raised, you remember, I raised them in the morning in our meeting, and she also felt that, it's difficult to separate management from giving these people a leeway. And if management gave these people this type of a leeway, how do we separate them now from an allegation that can come and say, but they are supporting them? That is our interest, because yourselves here as management, you will clear yourselves from this, and you say perception. In other words, the perception of giving leeway to people who are hostile to NUM. And over the page 30, perception, you will clear yourselves by ensuring that you defuse, you give out information that's related to this thing, and we're able to actually act on that information. So from the provincial commissioner's side, I want to put to you, she didn't want you to give leeway to the strikers. She wanted you to take a hard line against them. Would you accept that?
Yep.
Now, General Mpembe may have had a different attitude. His attitude is not altogether clear from the transcripts of the meetings that we have with him. But what I want to ask you, did General Mbombo at any stage after the 14th ever indicate to you that SAPS had now changed their mind and now they were happy for you to give some leeway to the strikers and they would actually like you to negotiate with the strikers? General Mbombo?
Not to my recollection, Chair.
Did anyone else from SAPS on the 16th tell Lonman that they now wanted Lonman to negotiate with the strikers?
Not that I know of.
If we go back to quadruple W4, we'll see that on the 16th, between 10:39 and 10:47, you had 4 calls with General Mbombo. And they lasted a total of more than 5 minutes, between 10:39 and 10:47. At any stage during those calls, did she try to persuade you that Lonman should go to the Kopi to speak to the miners?
The only call that I remember clearly was at some stage, and Mr. Matunjo refers to that, called me looking for Mr. Matunjo. And when I handed my phone to Mr. Matunjo, it was in the morning. One of these calls would have been that call where she called me that she was waiting for Mr. Matunjo to go to the copy, and I handed the phone to Mr. Matunjo. That's the only call that I really remember, because I had to give Mr. Matunjo the phone, and I think he has accounted for that in his statement.
Well, that would have been one of the calls. Of course, there were 3 others.
Yes. So,
do you recall her ever saying to you during those calls, SAPS needs you, or you being Lonman, to negotiate with these strikers? You must go to the Kopi and tell them you will negotiate.
No, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mokoena. Those are all my questions.
Okay. We will take the first adjournment now, 15 minutes. question resumes. You're still under oath, Mr. Mokoena. I understand that the last cross-examiner of Mr. Mokoena is going to be Mr. Rampela. He's been given 5 minutes.
Sorry, Chair. The evidence leaders were asked by NUM to ask some questions on NUM's behalf, which I ought to have put.
How long can we give him, Mr. Wesley? How long can we give Mr. Chesterton?
5 minutes, I'm told. Ms. Pillay will put those questions.
5 minutes for Ms. Pillay, and then 5 minutes for Mr. Rampela, and then it'll be re-examination by Mr. Bam, and that'll be the end of Mr. Mokoena's evidence. Yes. Ms. Pillay, do you want to go first, or should we let Mr. Rampela go first?
Chair, I have no preference.
Let's ask Mr. Rampela. Mr. Rampela? Okay. Ms. Pillay, Mr. Rampela would prefer for you to go ahead first.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mokoena, could I ask you to refer to XXX3?
So what's the page? Because mine are not referenced that way.
I'm not sure what it is in your bundle, but maybe if we can ask the technician to put up exhibit XXX3. It's a memorandum from, if we can go down to 448 of this bundle. And you'll see this document is a memorandum from Mr. Da Costa to Lonman Exco, and it's dated the 27th of June 2012. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, you will know, Mr. Mokoena, that this memorandum relates to the issue of the special allowance to the rock drill operators, which Mr. Da Costa was dealing with at the time.
Exactly.
Now, can I ask you to go down to the next page of this document, where we look specifically at the proposal that Mr. Da Costa is making to Exco. And you'll see it stated, the following is stated. Proposal, feedback will be given to the two representatives who met with the Vice President as follows. And you'll see in those 4 bullet points beneath that heading, Mr. Mokoena, that Mr. Da Costa is summarizing what you have described in your evidence as the default position.
Exactly.
Namely, that Lonman has well-established processes for negotiation, that should the company agree to a separate wage increase for RDOs in this way, it would set a precedent for other employees, and that the revised wage amount that has been requested is too high, and lastly, that management is prepared to undertake a revision of the drilling bonus system within the next 6 months. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
More or less, that amounts to what you've described as the default position, which is what we see, which is the approach taken by Lonman subsequently.
Exactly.
Now, importantly, Mr. Mokoena, if I could ask you to look at the line just directly below these 4 bullet points. And it stated that this feedback will be given on the 2nd of July 2012. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then this is the part that NUM has asked me to specifically put to you. The following appears. The feedback outlined above, in other words, the default position that you've described, is not likely to resolve the matter, and more work will be required over the next few weeks. Do you see that?
Yes.
In this regard, the following is proposed. And the first bullet point, to engage both the NUM and AMCU at national level to inform them of this development and to solicit their opinion on the matter. Do you see that?
Yes.
So in other words, what we see in this memorandum is Mr. Da Costa, saying to Exco that the default position is unlikely to resolve the matter, and that what he's suggesting is firstly that NUM and AMCU be engaged at national level in order to discuss the way forward. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
Now, the question, Mr. Mokoena, now we know from the evidence that has been placed before this commission that Lonman did in fact not engage either NUM or AMCU at national level to discuss the RDO demand. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
The question is, why wasn't that done? Specifically in circumstances where Mr. Da Costa pointed out to Exco that the default position was unlikely to resolve the situation.
Yes. My understanding is there were some engagements with both AMCU and NUM at the operations level. Yes, I'm not aware of any engagement at the national level. So there was engagement, feedback given to both AMCU and NUM at the operations level. about the RDO allowance.
And you're unable to explain why Mr. Da Costa's suggestion that the matter be taken up at national level with both NUM and AMCO, you're unable to say why that wasn't followed through?
Yeah, I don't have any reason why that was happened, and it's probably that our first major contact with unions on substantive issues is with the local leadership, the chairpersons of the branches and all that. And I'm aware that there were those engagements at the operations.
Now, the second part of that question, Mr. Mokoena, is why this wasn't taken up with NUM and AMCO at national levels, given the fact that the RDO allowance would amount to an effective increase in the salaries of the RDOs?
Our understanding of that allowance, that allowance was a management prerogative, like other many bonuses that we grant to employees. It has always been the discretion of management to do those. So that could have been the reason why there was no need to escalate the issue of allowance to National Office of National Union of Mine Workers and AMCO.
Thank you, Chair. Those are the questions.
The memorandum that Mr. Da Costa prepared, which is Exhibit XXX3, did that come before the EXCO meeting in July?
Gee, I do not recall the exact date of the EXCO meeting in July, Chair.
Well, you see, it says the feedback will be given on 2 July, so we know that this memorandum was prepared before that. There was a July EXCO meeting, was there not?
No, the EXCO is normally towards the end of the month, so EXCO would have deliberated at the end of June, and this memorandum would have been a follow-up coming out of EXCO to be communicated. So it would have been issued in between the 2 EXCO meetings.
So there was an EXCO meeting towards the end of July,
Yes,
and this memo, did that come before the meeting?
yes.
And do we know from the minutes of the meeting why the proposal that he made in the first bullet point was not accepted?
See, I do not, Chair, at the moment have access to the minutes of that meeting in July, whether this was deliberated. It is also customary that a lot of EXCO discussions are circulated and are not necessarily discussed in one sitting. And it could have happened on a Monday because we have monthly EXCO and we also have weekly EXCO calls every Monday. So it's possible that probably it was discussed in one of the Monday meetings, not necessarily the monthly EXCO meeting.
Anyway, would I be correct in saying that we can say in our report that this proposal of Mr. Da Costa's in the first bullet point was not accepted by EXCO, certainly not prior to the 16th of August or even the 10th of August 2012?
Yes, Chair.
And the reason for not accepting the proposal may be, you can't give it to us, although you took part in the discussion. Am I right?
Yes, Chair.
That's correct. It may be minuted, it may not be. I'll ask your legal representatives to take instructions. If there's any document from which the reasons appear, could that please be made available to the Commission? All right? You nod your head, Mr. Ma'am. You nod your head again. It doesn't come on record. Thank you. Do we know what the date of this memorandum is? It's an exhibit, I know, but what's the date of the date?
Chair, it's the 27th of June, 2012.
27th of June. And
Sorry,
do we know when the EXCO meeting was held in June? That was
Sorry,
I think Mr. McQueen is clear. It was after the EXCO meeting. Is that right?
The memo is dated the 26th of June, and the EXCO started on the 27th of June.
Would either have been considered then in the meeting at the end of June or the end of July, but anyway, whenever it was considered, if a document exists which indicates why this proposal wasn't accepted, then that's what we want. But you obviously can't help us, but I've asked your legal representatives who've undertaken to give it to us if there is such a document. Right, thank you. Then Mr. Rampere, those are your questions, Ms. Pillay.
Those are my
Mr.
questions.
Rampere, were you going to deal with that matter or another one?
Well, Chair, How many minutes did you give me?
5.
Okay. Are you saying Mr. Langa is just with 5 minutes?
Clock's already running on your time, don't waste.
Okay, let me use my 5. Mr. Mukwena, I represent Mr. Langa, Mabebe, and Mabelani. And I just want to remind you of what you said in relation to the death of Mr. Twala at the Kopi. Do you remember that you said as soon as you heard that Mr. Twala had been killed from Constance, you took a decision that it would be irresponsible to send anyone to the Kopi?
Yes, I recall that.
And you agree with me that as Vice President Human Capital, that was the right decision to take in view of the known danger at the Kopi?
Yes, I agree.
You remember that, and I'm going to refer you to Exhibit quadruple V, the bundle of Mr. Jameson. Okay. Can you get that on the screen, please? Quadruple V, page 3. Yeah, let's go to, you see paragraph 4 of this media release. It reads, the illegal march was accompanied by incidents of intimidation and violent action against employees who wanted to report for duty. 4 employees trying to report for work were injured on Friday 10th, 2 of whom have been hospitalized after receiving gunshot wounds, allegedly by rival supporters. A further 2 employees were hospitalized on Saturday 11th, also as a result of gunshot wounds. So it was known, will you agree with me, that it was known to Lonmin that there was danger for those employees who were to report for work?
That is correct.
It is also correct that in your recruitment, you recruit a large number of people coming from very distant places, and they have to find accommodation in neighboring villages. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that if these people were going to be going to work, and if you just look at this paragraph, if they were going to be going to work, they would face the same violent action by those who did not want them to go to work.
That is true.
And that it was a known danger that Mr. Langa, on his way to work, would, in all probability, if he were to meet the strikers, would be faced with the same fate of these people that were injured on the 10th.
That is correct.
And therefore, you'd agree with me that not informing Mr. Langa that he should not come to work because of the circumstance was something that one can call irresponsible.
That could be the case, Chair. If I may say, one of the options that actually we considered was to close the mine. And we deliberated extensively and looked at what that could mean for employees who then we would have to pay because they had absolutely nothing to do with the strike. So it was a matter that was discussed extensively. Let's close the mine. The question then was, if we close the mine, the workers who are not on strike have to be paid because they are not on strike. And we realized then it was going to be very difficult to determine who was actually on strike and who was not on strike if we were to pay people after closing the mine. Further, we also looked at the issue that if we close the mine, continue paying people who are not striking, the likelihood would have been, why would anybody therefore go back to work if they are paid because there's an unprotected strike? So it was a complex issue, Chair, I want to admit. However, it was a consideration on our part, actually, to close the mine as a tool to avoid further damage.
Yes. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the complexity you are in. Just that we're dealing with a person that has to face the strikers going to work from a village alone, as in the case of Mr. Langa. And whilst you were surmising whether you should close or not, this person has to be put in a situation where he's going to be facing violent action, probably gunshots, probably death as it happened.
Yes, I said I agree with you, and that's why I was trying to put context to my answer.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Well, I think my 5 minutes is up, Chair, so thanks.
Thank you. Re-examination, Mr. Patton?
Mr. McQuena, the bundle in front of you, may I ask you to turn to page 49, please? In the middle of the page, you'll be familiar with this. Some time was spent in your cross-examination on your statement. It is amazing how Joseph could lie before South African public what 10 people did. He's insinuating he knew he is insinuating. Now, you know, this was in the discussion on radio before Mr. Kolani Kwala.
Yes.
I want to draw your attention to two passages in the record and ask you whether you wish to comment on your statement in light of those two passages. The first is at page 18. Now, you know, you were taken to Exhibit 002, which was the AMCU press statement. Page 18 would appear to be the newspaper report reporting on that press statement.
Yes, Chair.
We go to that press statement, the 5th paragraph of that press statement, which commences with the following. AMCU stated that while 3,000 RDOs were marching to hand over a memorandum of demands to Lonman management, some of its members alleged that people dressed in NUM t-shirts and emerging from NUM offices had opened fire, killing one worker and injuring others on Friday. Then goes on to say, this then sparked the violence over the weekend that led to the death of 8 more people, including 2 policemen, and injuring many more. That statement, as I understand it, Mr. Matunjwa in his evidence had already indicated was incorrect and retracted that statement. Now, that was one of the press reports. May I then ask you to go back to page 49? And that came prior to the statement you made at page 49. At line, starting at, you'll see at the top of the page there's Mr. Matunjwa, then Kolani, then Mr. Matunjwa again. You see that?
Yes.
And when at that point he says, this is before you made your statement, he says, we did ask in terms of what is really happening. They are saying as part of this they went to management and say yes, they did hear that there will be some workers who are bringing sort of a memorandum to them. Please invite us into these processes. But the management, what they did, they neglected all the structures of the union and engaged those employees outside the structures of the union. Now, in light of what I've just referred to you, both in respect of the press article and this statement preceding what you had to say, do you wish to comment on what you've stated in the middle of that page?
Particularly that line number 10, Chair, I have presented before this commission that it was false to conclude that Lonmin management had engaged workers outside structures, and I've explained the practice at Lonmin. So, and particularly that I was dealing with matured union leadership that understood the nature of wage negotiations compared to workers knocking at a door and asking for an increase. The fact that Mike Da Costa spoke to the workers never occurred to me that he was opening wage negotiations. So I've always insisted on this misunderstanding, and for Mr. Matunja to make statements when he knew actually the rules of wage negotiations, the processes, the triggers, the whole thing, and suggested that we had engaged workers outside structures, for me, has always been a problem that I never understood why that was the case.
Thank you. May I ask you to turn to page 51, please? It's in the same radio discussion. On line 9, Kolani says, so the passages preceding this have already been read to you. And then line 9, Kolani says, so in other words, they did engage you, they did come to you, they raised their concerns, and you offered them 700 rand. You then say, you start off by saying, no, but you don't stop there. You say, no, those market allowances are a prerogative of management. They are done throughout the year to different categories. It was not a demand. They never demanded to get a market allowance. Now, having regard to the full response you gave, would you care to elaborate upon that against the background of the question which Clarani had put to you?
Yes. The essence of this statement, I was trying to explain to Mr. Kolani that throughout the year...
Mr. Gwala, but Kolani is his first name. I'm not on first name terms with him. Let's call him Mr. Gwala.
Oh, Mr. Gwale. Thank you, Chair. I was trying to explain to him that it is not an unregular practice that during the course of the year, management would adjust different types of allowances for different types of employees for market reasons. It could be rock drill operators, it could be winches, it could be all sorts of other job categories. And that has never been a matter of wage negotiations. It has always been a management prerogative. And I was trying to clarify that practice, that if management did that, whether an allowance or a bonus scheme, that was never an essence of collective bargaining with unions. It's a management decision to say, you're falling behind for this reason, we're going to give you X amount of money. That was the essence of my statement, that it was not a matter of wage negotiations.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have no further questions. Might I just say, though, that when I referred to Kolani, I meant no disrespect to Mr. Gwala. I was reading verbatim the transcript.
No, I accepted that was the case. I'm sure Mr. Gwala won't mind. Mr. Makwana, you're excused. You're excused. Thank you for coming and giving your evidence.
Thank you, Chair.
I understand you wish to make an announcement about another matter, Mr. Brown. Before you do that, perhaps we can introduce another note at this point. Mr. Mpofu, you did indicate to me you also wanted to make an announcement and extend some kind of invitation. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. Keeping up with my promise of last week, when all of you congratulated me, I had promised some cake, which has now been upgraded to a finger lunch in the breakaway room at lunchtime. So everyone is invited, Chairperson.
Thank you very much indeed. I presume there may be some remarks made there as well, but we have to keep an eye on the time for the lunch session.
Yes, thank you.
Afraid, but still.
I think Mr. Wesley will be there too.
Yes, he's in charge of that aspect of it. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you, Mr. Mpofu. Mr. Bam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, fellow commissioners. I handed to you at the break a document which is a Lonmin document relating to what has been provided or the support given by Lonmin on behalf of the families or to the families of the deceased. Perhaps you wish to give that an exhibit number, Mr. Chair. What I intend to do is spend no more than a few minutes just highlighting the key aspects of that.
Yes, you gave me a document headed Support for the Families of the Deceased. Lonman, a summary of statutory and non-statutory payments.
Yes.
And I think we can mark it quadruple X1. I don't know if there will be any other quadruple X exhibits, but we mark it that.
May I just preface what I'm going to go through by saying that this document was prepared as a result of the testimony given by the families of the deceased, or the presentations made by them. It has been therefore handed up to the Commission in the form of a presentation, and I'm just going to highlight certain key aspects of it. The first point that Lonman makes in the presentation is that in the aftermath of the Marikana disaster, the company Lonman recognized that although there were policies, it talks of insurance policies and the like, in place that paid out to beneficiaries in the event of death, in this particular instance, the company recognized it as an extraordinary event, and for that reason had taken a resolution to provide direct assistance to the families. It then gave consideration to the nature of that direct assistance, and it states the following. Given the extraordinary nature of the events at Marikana, Lonman resolved that the best and most enduring contribution it could make would be to provide its deceased employees' dependent children with an education. Consequently, it established a memorial trust fund to fund their school and tertiary education. In addition, Lonman also facilitated various payments to the families from statutory sources, and a summary of those payments is set out in the document. There are three sources of non-statutory, namely voluntary payments, which have been made to families. The first is from the Memorial Trust Fund, and there are full details of every person to whom such payments have been made in an annexure to the document. The payments made to date amount to 2,691,506 Rand. In addition to that, there was an ad hoc education payment, and I'll explain that shortly, in an amount of just over 143,000 Rand. And then there were payments made through TEBA for welfare support, which Lonman describes as additional contributions to deceased wives and children between November 2012 and July 2014, and that was in an amount of 2,477,317 Rand. Those then were the non-statutory payments. There were also statutory payments that have been made, facilitated through Lonman by the Marikana Provident Fund to the families, and again, details of the beneficiaries to whom those payments have been made are fully set out in an annexure to this document. Those payments total 9,929,547 Rand. In relation to the Memorial Trust Fund, principally directed towards meeting educational needs, that fund provides costs for education assistance, full educational assistance, extramural activities, boarding fees, local school fees where children are not boarding, tertiary education, and the cost of accommodation, prescribed books, stationery, transport, and food at the tertiary institution. During July 2013, Mr. Ben Magara and members of his management team visited families of the deceased employees in the Eastern Cape, Lesotho, and elsewhere. At that point in time, a decision was made to ensure that these children had access to the best possible education to meet their needs and facilities, and not necessarily just the education facilities available in their home area. Consequently, you'll see in the schedule that in certain instances there's private school tuition fees being paid as well. In July 2014, Lonman representatives embarked on a school visit audit to check that the beneficiaries of the trust fund were at the education institutions as stated in the trust fund. At the same time, Lonman undertook a needs analysis at schools in Kokstad, KwaZulu-Natal, the Free State, Eastern Cape, Swaziland, and Lesotho in order to establish if the children had what they needed. During those visits, it was established that the children needed additional toiletries, books, and stationery, while some also needed uniforms. Lonman immediately provided these items, as well as laptops, scanners, and printers for those attending at tertiary institutions. The cost of these ad hoc education-related expenses was just over 143,000 Rand. in addition to those benefits paid for purposes of education, there were certain non-education related payments. This included payments made for family support between November 2012 and July 2014, where a total of 2,477,317 rand was paid towards support for the deceased's wives and children. This included the cost of families' transport, accommodation, burial preparations, meals, and funeral services. Those payments were made via TEBA, and details of payments made to TEBA for those purposes are set out in the schedule to the document. And what you'll then find are certain schedules, a schedule which sets out the Marikana Provident Fund payment with details of the amounts paid, when those payments were made, and the beneficiary to whom the payment was made, and that's the amount of just over 9 million rand. Details of the payments made via TEBA for funeral cover and payroll is set out in a second schedule to the document. Finally, there's full details of trust student payments made. In other words, every student beneficiary on behalf of whom educational payments have been made is set out in a schedule in detail, which identifies the student, the family they come from, as well as the amount paid on behalf of the student and the institution to whom the amount is paid. And the last schedule then deals with non-statutory payments for welfare support for families, and these were payments made to TEBA for onward facilitation to the families. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I understand that the payments to which you referred all made to the families of deceased persons who were actually in the employ of Lonman. That's correct, isn't it?
That is absolutely correct.
I also understand from Mr. Nsibeza that he wishes to submit an interrogatory to Lonman on behalf of the families of 3 persons, deceased persons, who were not employed by Lonman to get Lonman's response. So you will get the interrogatory shortly, and once we have the reply, I take it Mr. Nsibeza may deal with it in his argument. But your document that you've given us, the exhibit, deals fully, I take it, with the families of those deceased persons who were in the employ of Lonman on the 16th of August.
It deals with those families, the nature of the payments made, the purpose for which it's been made, the beneficiary towards whom it's been made, and the details of the institutions to whom it's been made.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Bam. Do you want to say something at this stage or later? Later. So I think we can now move on to Mr. Sadat. Recall Mr. Sadat. Mr. Wesley is going to give us the details of the parties who are going to cross-examine Mr. Sadat and the times that have been allocated.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I do understand that in Chief, though, there are some matters that must still be dealt with for approximately 10 minutes. Chair, then, for cross-examination, the sequence and the allocated times will be as follows. Evidence leaders, 180 minutes, followed by AMCU, 30 minutes, followed by the Legal Resources Centre, 25 minutes, and finally the Human Rights Commission, 25 minutes.
Yes, thank you. You will keep the time, keep a close watch on that. Mr. Sadat, you remember when you were here last time, you swore that you give evidence truthfully and fully and so forth. I remind you, you're still under your oath. Yes, thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Berger, I understand there are a couple of matters you want to deal with briefly by way of concluding the examination in chief of the witness.
Indeed, Chair. 3 small issues. I start the first one by referring to Volume 4 of Exhibit Quadruple S2. Those are the 5-volume exhibit. Mr. Sadat, as part of the financial statements of Lonman during the relevant period 2008 to 2012, there was also inserted what was called a sustainability report.
That's right.
And I don't have time to refer to all those sustainability reports. They are all in Volume 4. But can I just highlight 2 of them? The 2010 report appears at page 1404, and I refer to that because this is in the year that the new mining charter is published, and this is your report to shareholders on, inter alia, the subject of housing. And at page 1404, in the window, you find a report back on housing, and I will ask you to read just the paragraph below the window, starting with regrettably, into the record.
Sure. Excuse my voice. I've got a bit of a sore throat. Regrettably, there have been several challenges that have required us to adjust the 5,500 houses target. These challenges include sufficient and appropriate land not being available in the vicinity of the workplace, insufficient water and electricity supply, and financial constraints resulting in delay to meeting our committed targets.
And then the second year I want to highlight is 2012, and I want you to explain to the Commission why it was experienced that housing, separate standing housing, was not well received by the workers. But can we look at the report which you find at page 1424? This is part of the sustainability report for the 2012 annual statements of Lonmin. And there is a long section. We simply don't have the time to read it. But you will know this page, and perhaps particularly with reference to what is in the first column. Will you just remind us why the housing did not appear to be a success with the employees?
It lists on various bullet points there. It was a rising cost of housing and availability of finance amid increased economic constraints, lack of sufficient available land or non-lease lease area, shortage of water and electricity, which is worsened by the spread of unplanned informal settlements, and consequent increase in pressures on services as some employees choose to sublet their purchased or rented homes to tenants. And this is the important bullet point. A lack of interest in home ownership, despite government requirements that ownership among employees be increased. Many employees still opt to stay in hostels or rentals as they are considered to be more affordable, and employees from distant labor-sending areas often do not want to invest in property at Marikana when they already have a home and community base elsewhere. And of course, there's issues around schooling and other community facilities as well as the community has grown.
And what was London's experience with that housing development that had been done in the late 90s?
Yeah, as has been mentioned previously, the Marikana Housing Development Company was set up in cooperation as a Section 21 company with the local authorities. If memory serves me correctly, around 1,200 homes were built. And the basis of how those houses were sold is that a person takes occupation. The price is fixed on the day of occupation, which is around 62,000 rands, if memory serves me correctly. And the rental, which is around 500 rands a month, would all accumulate towards paying for that house. So there was no interest charge, there was no rebasing of the price of the house, and the additional requirements was that the occupant would pay for the use of electricity and water services. That scheme was introduced, I think, from late 99 onwards, so now it's some 14 years since the scheme was introduced. And one would think that after 10 years, at paying 6,000 rands a year rental, the house would have been paid for and the occupants would willingly take ownership of those properties. Sadly, in these 14 years, I think only about 240 odd homes have actually been transferred to the occupants. The remaining 800 odd homes, to the best of my knowledge, the amounts owed on those homes are relatively small. 1 to 5,000 rands, I think, is the number that remains in my mind for the majority of them. And we even explored possibilities of using money from the pension fund, getting a loan against the pension fund, to enable the occupants to take ownership of those houses, because those houses in early 2000 were worth 62,000 rands. Today, they're probably worth 200,000 to 300,000 rands. But there has been a reluctance for that to happen, and we can ascribe that to several reasons. One is that ratio of 240 odd have taken occupation versus remainder not taking occupation seems to correspond with the survey we did, which said that the vast majority of employees do not want to own homes, around 85% if I remember correctly. They want to rent accommodation, probably because they have a home back from where they come and in the communities they come from, and they don't want to burden with the second home. That was the one reason. The second reason is that once the employee took ownership of that house, he would be responsible for all maintenance. He would be responsible for the provision of electricity, for payment of that, and water, and other rates that normally go with ownership of a home. And there seemed to have been a reluctance to take responsibility for those charges. And that seems to correspond to the survey we did in late 2007, where one of the things the people who were surveyed said is that if we buy a house, all we expect to do is pay for the cost, the purchase price of the house, installment to pay for it. We don't want to pay for electricity, we don't want to pay for water, we don't want to pay for rates. So the actual practice seems to correspond to what we've actually seen with these MHDC homes. Incidentally, the money that has accumulated in this MHDC is about 25 million rands a few years ago. The intention was, and the MHDC is a company that has its own board of directors, including union membership and Lonman management. And the intention was to take that money and roll it over to build more homes in a progressive way. And I think that intention still exists, but I'm not sure how successful they've been at actually implementing it.
Thank you. Another subject, in a report, Dr. Forrest raises a query about what I may call intergroup payments. Payments by Lonman to an entity called Lonman Management Services and a second entity called Western Metal Sales Limited. Now, subsequent to that, there's been a set of facts agreed with the evidence leaders, between the evidence leaders and Lonman, and that'll be placed before the Commission. But perhaps just a thumbnail sketch explaining to the Commission the role of Lonman Management Services and the background to the fee they receive from Western Platinum for that service being rendered.
Clearly, these arrangements have been there for a long time, long before I got there, but to the best of the research I've done, what I've been able to establish is that historically, Lonman, and that's WPL, Western Platinum Limited, and Eastern Platinum Limited primarily, its assets were in two countries. One was the old South Africa, and the other one was the old Botswana. Two different legal jurisdictions as well. And it's not uncommon in the industry, and the previous companies I was involved with had similar arrangements, is that to try to optimally use your management, you create a single management team to manage these businesses that exist across many geographical boundaries and country boundaries. So Lonman, I think, did the same thing here. They established Lonman Management Services, which provided services both to WPL and EPL, and the kind of services it provided was everything to do with its shareholding, listing, which is company secretarial, legal, treasury, finance, exploration work, and then later on, when Western Metal Sales was closed out in 2007, if memory serves me correctly, even the marketing of its metal was done through this LMS. And LMS, the people it employed for these services, whether the sales, as I said, sales, marketing, legal, treasury, company secretarial, finance, all of these, the people and the resources that were used by LMS had to be paid for by LMS.
Who employs the CEO, for example?
The CEO would have been part of LMS. I'm subject to correction. He may be part of Lonman PLC, but outside WPL and EPL. The buildings that it rented to house these people would also have to be paid for by LMS. And in order to enable it to do that, it charged a fee back to WPL based on turnover. That, as I said, is what I'm familiar with. That has been done in other mining companies that work across many different geographies and boundaries. Western Metal Sales, again, it's not an unusual arrangement to have a marketing company which is generally located in a jurisdiction where the tax regime is much more favorable. As I said, many of the diversified mining companies that I've worked with and I'm familiar with have this arrangement. They still have it till today. And what happens is that the moment the metal, in this case, the platinum and platinum group metals are produced, as soon as they leave the boundary of the refinery, in our case, it becomes owned by this marketing company. And all risks then pass on to this marketing company. And what kind of risks? Well, there's logistical risks. You could lose product in transfer. The price could significantly drop from the day you pass the metal on to the marketing company to the day it sells it. The counterparty risk in terms of the customers and payment risks that are taken on by this marketing company. And the cost of bearing these risks translates into a charge that the marketing company charges for the metal it sells. And I've seen these charges range from, in Lonman's case, while it had this arrangement, around 2%, to cases where it could be as high as 7-8%, depending on the risk. All of these arrangements are subject to scrutiny by our auditors, subject to scrutiny by SARS, both I'm talking about the marketing arrangement, as well as the LMS entity. And throughout the period, there have not been any concerns raised by SARS with these arrangements.
To your knowledge, did LMS ever suffer a loss in any financial year?
Oh, yes, because the fee that LMS gets paid is subject to the turnover of WPL, which is effectively related to the price of the platinum and platinum group metals that are produced. In a year like 2009, so I'm talking October 2008 to September 2009, where the price literally dropped from over $2,000 a fine ounce for platinum to around $800 a fine ounce, it meant in that year, Lonman LMS recovered significantly less because of the depressed platinum price in that year, recovered significantly less and therefore could not cover the costs of the services and the resources that it was obliged to provide in terms of those agreements.
Then finally, at the last occasion, there was a debate about housing in the context of containers, and you had a view on that. Chair, I was handed this morning a little bundle which this witness prepared. I only have 4 copies, and I should have done it in re-examination, but that would take away the ability of my learned colleagues to ask questions on it. May I hand this up and ask the witness to speak for a minute to it and undertake to hand out copies after lunch so that everybody knows what we're talking about? I have copies for you and your 2 commissioners and for the witness, but those are the only 4 copies I have at present.
Yes, Chair.
Ms. Pillay will tell me what
That'll be quadruple S 4 or 5.
Chair, if I can just indicate, we have already pre-marked the exhibits to be introduced by the evidence leaders. There are 2 volumes of them, and they'll be quadruple S4 and quadruple S5. So this document would be quadruple S6.
Quadruple S6, thank you. It's, how do we just call it?
Housing : containerization or something like that, Chair. I'm in your hands.
Right. Housing : containerization, and that will be quadruple S6. Thank you.
Mr. Sidat, you have in front of you a little document which you prepared. I believe we have 2 minutes. Will you just explain to us what you try to explain in that?
Sure. Chairman, when we did the survey in 2007, employees were quite adamant about what they wanted. They wanted a single unit on a piece of land. It had to be made of bricks and mortar. And they were not prepared to pay for other services, as I mentioned earlier, once they started paying for the house. So this is a major challenge, and I want to qualify what I'm discussing here is it needs leadership from labor, government, business, local authorities, if we're going to find a solution that works for everyone, an affordable solution. And after my presentation on Thursday, when I went back home, I got onto the internet and just decided to do a search. And the first document you see there is a real live example. As I said, as you're driving up the M1 North, if you look to your left, there is the student accommodation that has been built right here in Johannesburg. And it's containers, and in fact, these containers have been stacked many, many levels high. There's pictures of the interiors of these units, etc. So yeah, and around the world, there's examples in France that I picked up. There's examples in other parts of the world as well, where similar exercises have been done, and apparently very successfully. And I just wanted to share this as being a real example where if good leadership is applied, there's a meeting of the minds. I think that's extremely important. Solutions can be found that would be ultimately infinitely better than what we currently have with those informal townships, but not necessarily the ideal, but certainly something that can work very well. And just to expand a little bit, in terms of rented accommodation, as you were in our current hostels, we've reduced the density massively, but we still have the water resources, we have the wastewater treatments, etc., all in those hostels. A solution like this, where you could stack up these containers and properly convert it into acceptable accommodation units, could possibly mean that we could have employees back in the hostel location enjoying single-room accommodation in a much better condition than they currently enjoy, with all of the other benefits that go with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That's the evidence in chief.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Larry. The first cross-examiner is going to be Mr. Chesterton. But perhaps it's convenient for us to take the second break now, and we'll then have an unbroken session of cross-examination until lunchtime.
Thank you, Chair. That would enable me to
Quarter of an hour.
organise my papers.
Resumes. You're still under oath, Mr. Sidat. Mr. Chassels.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There will be 2 cross-examination bundles of exhibits, and I just want to check that Mr. Sidat has got either 2 files that say Volume 1 and Volume 2, or quadruple S4 and quadruple S5. Can I ask you, Mr. Sidat, and the commissioners to mark Volume 1 quadruple S4 and Volume 2 quadruple S5? And just briefly to explain the division of the 2 volumes, quadruple S4 is a series of Lonman PLC's annual reports from, I think, 2007 to 2012. Quadruple S5, most of the documents in quadruple S5 are annual financial statements of Western Platinum Limited from 2008 through to 2012. And then there are a sundry collection of individual documents that I will be referring to in due course. And if we can start, Mr. Sidat, with just clarifying a number of well, what I'd like to suggest are errors and possibly uncontroversial errors in your evidence in chief. I don't want to spend too much time on it. I just want to put you a number of cases where I say that you've got certain details wrong and see if we can just clarify those. The first is the cost of accommodation in informal settlements at the moment. Now that you spoke of in your evidence in chief at page 37760, and you suggested that the going rate at the moment is 500 a month rental for a single person, and a person living in a married shack 800 rands a month. You recall that?
That's right, and I've subsequently seen a document. I'm talking historically. It's 800 and 1,200. 800
and 1,200. Great. Just for the reference, that document for the record will be quadruple S5 at page 374. So the going rate for informal settlement rentals is 800 rands and 1,200 rands. The next detail relates to full proclamation of Marikana Extension 2. I think that's what you were referring to in your testimony at page 37743, when you said at lines 12 to 15, we couldn't progress until proclamation of the remainder of the township was done, and if I recall correctly, and Barnard will be better able to speak on it, if I recall, that was only done around 2012. In fact, the correct date is 10 February, sorry, not 2012, 2010 was your testimony. The correct date was 10 February 2009, and the local government notice is Local Authority Notice 28 of 10 February 2009. Now, the third is a much more substantial issue, and for that I need to start with your table of dividends at page 2004 of quadruple S2, which was your primary evidence in chief bundle. So if I can just ask you to have that table to hand, and it is an issue on which I'm going to have to address it's quite a complicated issue, so I'd like that table to be up on the screen so that everyone else can see it as well. Before I get to what I'm going to suggest are quite serious errors in that table, I need to clarify some issues around the Lonman corporate structure and also the SLP obligations. The first point that I want to clarify is that Lonman PLC is really the holding company of the 2 South African operating subsidiaries. It holds 82% of Western Platinum Limited, which does Western Platinum Limited and Eastern Platinum Limited. Lonman PLC is the English company. Western Platinum Limited and Eastern Platinum Limited are the South African operating companies.
That's correct.
Now, in your evidence in relation to those sales commission payments, you mentioned Lonman Management Services. And I got the sense from your evidence that you were suggesting, or that it may have been misunderstood, that Lonman Management Services is actually a separate entity from Lonman PLC. It isn't. It's the same entity.
Well, it's Lonman PLC owns Lonman Management Services.
No, I think you'll find it's actually the same entity. Lonman Management Services is the South African branch company of Lonman PLC.
Okay, yeah.
It's Lonman PLC and its South African guys.
That's right.
There's no... you couldn't do a transaction between LMS and Lonman PLC. They are the same entity.
Yeah, it's South African branch of Lonman PLC, yes.
Right.
Is it registered as a foreign company in terms of the Companies Act?
It is registered. It is registered as a South African company, as an external company.
As a foreign company.
Yes.
South African
So
company.
it's Lonman PLC's guys in South Africa. Registered presence in South Africa.
Not a separate legal persona, in other words.
Well, it's the separate legal persona in South Africa representing Lonman PLC.
Yes. No, it's not a separate legal persona from Lonman PLC.
Well, I'm not sure if that is correct because it has a separate set of directors and it operates separately from the Lonman PLC UK listed company. I think we can check that with the legal.
Maybe we could clarify it. I thought that we'd sorted that out between us and Lonman, but we'll hold that. If it becomes relevant, it will become relevant later. But then there are some other issues that I need to clarify with you. The first is that the BEE interest that is held by Nkwala, that's not a direct interest in Lonman PLC. That's an 18% interest in Eastern Platinum Limited and Western Platinum Limited.
That's right. It's an interest in the South African subsidiaries of Lonman PLC.
Indeed.
Yes.
So Nkwala is not a shareholder of Lonman PLC.
Not of PLC, but WPL and EPL, yes.
Yes. It's also got a 26% interest in a different South African subsidiary, that's Akanani Mining Pty Limited.
That's right.
And Akanani has, I'm not sure whether it's a mining right or a prospecting right over certain assets in Limpopo, but it's not operational at this stage.
No, that's right. It currently has a prospecting right, which I think has been extended, and they are busy with looking at feasibility studies on how you can convert that into a mine. So it's, yeah.
Okay. And the mining rights that are held in Marikana are not held by Lonman PLC. They're held by WPL and EPL.
That's right.
And the SLP obligations that we're concerned with today, those are obligations of WPL and EPL. They're not obligations of Lonman PLC.
That's right.
If we can then go back to your table with that corporate structure in mind, and if there's a generic problem in the table, but I'm going to illustrate it with respect to 2007 and 2008. So can we shift the table to the left? But we still need that opening column. We need to straddle 2007, 8 on the far right-hand side, and we need to be able to read the descriptive column, which tells us what the rows mean. So the 2007 and 2008 columns are dividend columns, and the first row says dividend paid to shareholders. And you would suggest that this is the total dividend paid to Lonman shareholders at all levels.
Yeah, it includes the dividends paid to the South African Nkwala in this case.
Yeah, well, that's the mistake. It doesn't.
Well,
now, you see, so what you get, so you deduct in the second row dividends paid to Nkwala to say that what Lonman shareholders get is 121 million in 2008 and 150 million in 2007. That's how the table works, is it not? You've got total,
yes, yeah.
subtracting Nkwala,
yes.
this is what's left for Lonman shareholders. Now that's wrong. And I would like to show you that it's wrong with reference to the 2008 annual report. Now that's in quadruple S4 at page 196. So if we could now go to quadruple S4, page 196, which sets out what dividends were paid and how. 196. And if we can just go up a little bit, what you have is 2 years compared. 1 October 2007 is the upper box. 1 October 2006 is the lower box. My comparison should have been 2006, 2007, not 2007, 2000. No. It's the 2008 financial year is the top box. 2007, as at 30 September 2007, is the bottom box. And if you look at these dividends, under retained income for the 2008 financial year, you deduct 186 million dividends, which will be dividends paid to Lonmin PLC shareholders. There's a separate amount of 65 million, we're talking dollars, not rands, that are paid to minority interests. Those are the dividends that have been paid out to Inkwala at WPL and EPL level before the money goes into the Lonmin PLC. And the total is 251 million. So the 186 million has to be added to the Inkwala figure of 65 million to give the total of 251. And you'll see the same underneath in respect to the 2008 year. $171 million paid to Lonmin shareholders. 41 million has been paid to Inkwala at operating company level. The total is 212. What you've done is subtracted rather than added.
It appears so. I got these numbers from our finance people, and I didn't go back and check the financial statement. So I need to speak to the financial people.
Can I suggest that you speak to your finance people and clarify that what I'm putting to you is correct, and you produce a revised version of the table. But I'm going to suggest that there are some other rows that need to be put into the table. Because the source of the confusion, if I can see it, is that the Inkwala dividends are paid by WPL and EPL, not by Lonmin PLC.
That's right.
And Inkwala has this 18% interest in WPL and EPL. Lonmin has an 82% interest in WPL and EPL. So for every 18 rands that get paid in dividends to Inkwala by WPL and EPL, 82 rands get paid to Lonmin in dividends by WPL and EPL. And as we've looked at the financial statements of WPL. We can't find a single year where WPL paid dividends to Inkwala for its 18% share without paying a corresponding dividend to Lonmin for its 82% share. And let me illustrate that to you with reference to the WPL 2009 financials. That's quadruple S5, page 84. So these are the dividends paid by WPL. And the column dividends paid, I'm marking with a pointer now, it's just below the row that has note 15 attached to it. And you'll see that in the 2008 financial year, WPL paid out dividends of just over 2.5 billion rands. Do you have the page?
I follow that, yeah.
2009 financial year. Now, the 2009 financial year was the first financial year after the financial crisis took in. It started on 1 October 2009, which was after the crisis. Sorry, 1 October 2008, which was after the crisis. The crisis was September 2008. WPL in that year paid out dividends in excess of R1 billion. Okay? Now, we know from a fact...
You nod your head, the answer is yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Now, if we go to... Well, let me put it to you that 18% of those dividends would have been paid to Ntwala. The other 82%, roughly 800 million rands, would have been paid to Lonmin PLC. Would you accept that?
Yes.
And we can see that more or less confirmed by the schedules to the agreed statement of fact in quadruple S5 at page 235. So if we can go there. Which tells us that in the 2009 financial year, total dividends were paid to Ntwala in the amount of 205 million. Now, that would have been a total from both Eastern and Western. We know that the total dividend paid out by Western alone for 2009 was 1 billion. So there's at least another 800 million that would have to have gone to Lonmin PLC from the WPL dividend.
You accept that?
Yes, I agree. Yes.
We can work on the basis that unless you say you don't agree, we can assume you agree. That will probably shorten things.
Okay.
Now, on that note, I mean, with that background, your finance people are going to redo the table, which is at page 2004 of quadruple S2. What I'd like your finance people to do is not just to correct the subtraction and the addition, but also in each year, where dividends are paid to Ntwala, where you have a row describing dividends paid to Ntwala, put in a corresponding row which will show us what dividends were paid to Lonmin PLC from the operating companies.
Okay.
Now, I now want to take you to a document that you were led to in evidence in chief that concerns the Section 93 order that was issued to Western Platinum and Eastern Platinum, and that is in your bundle, quadruple S2 1558 is where it starts.
So you've got to give me the file number, unfortunately.
Sorry. I'm going to need assistance to that. It is... You've got the quadruple S2s.
Bundle, as I understand it.
No, yes, but it was broken up into volumes, and I have mine all in one electronic file. 1558.
Volume 4, I think it was.
Try volume 4.
It says volume 4, page 1558. That's what the screen says, and I think that's what is correct.
Will you give me a list of the page numbers of each volume?
Yes, I have it.
Now, the first point I'd like to draw attention to is what the document is. It says notification to the Minerals and Mining Development Board in terms of Section 52 of the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Act by Western Platinum Limited and Eastern Platinum Limited. And it is your answer to the Section 93 directive. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
But what's important is because the license holders are WPL and EPL, the 93 order had been directed to WPL and EPL, and the reply comes from WPL and EPL.
That's correct.
I want to take you to a statement that we see at page 1571. Where you're discussing steps that you've taken, and you say, under the third bullet point, cash preservation structures have been implemented and no dividend was paid to shareholders at the end of the 2008 financial year. Now, this is a document that's issued by WPL and EPL. That's not correct. Let me put my concern. At the end, in the 2008 financial year, WPL alone paid dividends of R1 billion, more than R1 billion. What's your response to that?
Well, I think to answer your question, that 4.1 is headed at corporate level. And I think in Lonman's view, the corporate refers to Lonman PLC, because the CEO and the chairman are at PLC level. So I would argue that all of those points are responding or talking about what has been done at the corporate level, which is the Lonman PLC level.
But it comes in the context of a response where you've explained that you haven't built houses because, inter alia, the financial crisis has left you without the cash reserves to do so. Now, the obligation to build houses was WPL and EPL's. And you have the statement that says no dividends have been paid.
I think it's very difficult to talk of WPL and EPL without considering aspects of the PLC structure. And the reason why I say that is one of the benefits of being located in the UK is the access to capital markets, which is banks, etc., debt, at much more favorable rates. So generally, Lonman would negotiate loans at PLC level against its balance sheet, and that's why the dividends have to flow from WPL, EPL back into PLC, so it has substance behind it. And similarly, when one considers what Lonman can do, you can't do just, although the structures are WPL, EPL legally, you have to include the PLC structure because that is an inherent component of how Lonman finances itself.
Well, you say Lonman negotiates these loans, but is it not Lonman policy that whoever's negotiated the loans, they are very quickly transferred down to operational level?
Well, the funds are generally kept at PLC level and loaned to the operation that requires it. Not all of those funds are automatically transferred down to the subsidiaries.
There is another subsidiary that we haven't spoken about, which is Western Mining Pty Limited. Who carries the loan finance in respect of Western Mining Limited?
Well, Western Mining came to an end, I think, in 2007. And I wouldn't be able to tell you who carries the financing for that. But I would guess up to 2007, the sole shareholder of Western Mining would have been Western Metal Sales. Are you talking Western Metal Sales?
No, not Western. Sorry, Messina Mining Pty Limited. Messina Mining Pty Limited. I'm sorry.
If I remember correctly, Messina was bought as a subsidiary of WPL.
It wasn't bought as a subsidiary of WPL. It was bought by Lonman PLC and quickly converted into a subsidiary of WPL.
Well, it's part of the assets of WPL. And any financing paid for that, if the initial sale, and the sale may have happened at the PLC level for good reason, because it all depends on what's the most effective structure that would give effect to the sale in the most efficient way. So I don't have the details of that. It was done prior to me getting there, but I would guess at the time when you were considering this purchase, it made sense to do it at the PLC level to get all of the paperwork completed and the approvals in place. Once that was done, it then became prudent to transfer that asset into WPL.
And Messina Mining has been dormant for some time, has it not?
It was operating until we had the financial crisis in around 2008, and because it is not economic, operations were put on care and maintenance, and to date I think they're still on care and maintenance.
And all of that finance cost sits on the WPL balance sheet?
Well, I guess when the asset was transferred to WPL, there would have to be a corresponding entry in the WPL books, yes.
And if you go back on the WPL balance sheet, you'll see each year there's a massive impairment of that loan on the WPL balance sheet.
Well, I'm not sure if it's an impairment. It's an indication of that loan is still outstanding.
No, impairment as well.
Okay.
That was a bit of a digression. But I don't accept your proposition that in response to a directive to WPL to explain why it isn't building houses, it's an answer to say, well, our holding company hasn't paid dividends. We'll get to that in more detail later. But let's take your statement at face value.
Chair, may I just, and I may be wrong here, my learned friend, as I understand it, is working on the premise that the Section 93 inquiry is met by the document starting at page 1558 of Volume 4. That's not correct. The response to the Section 93 inquiry is at page 1548. That's the document dated 31st August of that year. And that was, in fact, the evidence in chief.
If that's an error, I will stop this. Well, I'll have one last comment that stands independent of that inquiry. I must apologize for that, but the 1558 document is nonetheless a document issued by Western and Eastern. My last point in relation to that bullet point is you say no dividend was paid to shareholders at the end of the 2008 financial year. It seems to me that even in relation to Lonman PLC, that's at best a half-truth, because there'd been massive interim dividends paid during the financial year in 2008. Do you accept that?
Interim dividends may be paid. I'm trying to just...
Well, if you go back to your table, you'll see that, in fact, the total amount of dividends paid in that financial year was $186 million. That's about R1 billion.
Well, if you read the bullet point, generally, when these kind of comments are made, you talk of an interim dividend and a dividend at the end of the financial year. And this refers to the shareholders at the end of the 2000 financial year. The interim dividend wasn't referred to here.
That's right. But it does beg the question of, of the fact that close to R1 billion was paid out during that financial year before the end of the financial year.
Well, when you, in the course of the financial year, when you got the platinum price exceeding $2,000 a fine ounce, when there are no signs that there's going to be a meltdown, you're fairly confident that you can pay a dividend and still have enough cash available for other things. When the absolutely the very beginning of the new financial year, when you're still preparing your financial statements, which are finalized around November, December of the following year, financial year, you then confronted with the platinum price of $800, you immediately have to go into cash conservation, irrespective of how good the previous financial year was, and that's why the decision was made then not to pay dividends going forward, to pass on a dividend, as they call it.
Let me then move to another topic, which is these sales commission payments that you mentioned in your evidence in chief earlier today. And the commission is a 2% commission, and we're talking about fairly substantial amounts of money. If one goes to quadruple S4, page 235, there is a schedule of what these payments were. Can we go to quadruple S4 235?
File 1.
Quadruple S5 234. 235. Try 234. Yes. 236. Sorry, go back up. I've got my reference wrong. It's going to be further up. That's 234.
Do you want 232?
Can we just reduce the page to so that it's all visible? So down to 233? Sorry, yeah, 234? 235? There's a page missing from this document in the one that's been printed, that's been distributed. I'll arrange for that page to be incorporated into the distributed document. But will you agree with me, and it's my arithmetic, that the aggregate amount of these 2% commission payments from 2008 to 2012 was 1.2 billion rands, 1,231,662,719 in sales commission.
I haven't done the calculation, so I'm not aware of the number, but let's assume your number is correct for the purpose.
Assume my number is correct. We can address that in the lunch break. You said that these payments are really essentially for the risk that is carried by either Lonman Management Services or Western Metal Sales Limited in the past in relation to these in relation to the sale of Lonman Platinum.
Well, primarily risk, but there are also other costs. You have a marketing manager, you have salespeople, so it's all the fixed costs plus the costs related to undertaking.
Well, let's separate those. What do you think the total cost of the Lonman marketing section, I don't know, division? Well, it isn't a division, a department. What would that be?
Again, I'm going by memory, but the fixed costs are probably in the region. You've also got, just to clarify, you've got other costs in there as well, which is, for example, there is a platinum marketing organization that is supported not only by Lonman, but by the other major platinum suppliers to try to get the jewelry market to take increased consumption. So that's included in there. I'm speaking subject to correction because I haven't been involved in running the business for the better part of 4 or 5 years. But my guess is that could be up to $50 million a year, including all of those costs.
$50 million a year.
Because the marketing of the Jewelry Council alone, if I remember correctly, and again I'm speaking subject to correction, was around $15 to $20 million a year.
Well, maybe Lonman could give us a little breakdown of that. I mean, it's not fair to ask you to do it on your feet now. But the rest of these amounts, which have been running on sort of on average at around 200 million rands a year for the 2008 to 2012 financial years, you say is in respect of risk transfer.
Well, the moment the metal, what I said is the moment the metal leaves the property, which is in our case is the refinery in Boksburg, it is taken ownership by this entity, and all the issues related with getting that metal from there to the customer are the responsibility of this entity, and that includes the risks associated with that. It's the financial risks, logistical risks, payment risks are all then accepted by this entity.
Look, I have been given a copy of the agency agreement to inspect. The risk transfer that you're talking about would have to be pursuant to that agreement, would it not? Yes, there's no other agreement that you're aware of that governs risk?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Well, it's only risk. It's the whole transfer of ownership and all the issues that go with the transfer of ownership and the sale and delivery to the ultimate customer.
And you say a transfer of ownership is regulated by that agreement?
Well, the transfer of the ownership of the metal from Lonman to the customer. All the issues related to making that transfer happen. It's arranging the logistics. It's ensuring there's insurance to cover any issues with the loss of those of the PGMs. It's to do with ensuring that you get paid, and there's issues with currency that you may have to hedge. All of these things. It's a value chain from the point that it leaves the Blackpan refinery to the point where it gets to the customer, that this organization is responsible for providing.
But ownership doesn't ever pass to this organization?
I don't recall what the agreement says. It's an agency, so I don't think it passes.
Well, maybe I would ask the Lonman legal team to let me have another look at that agreement, because these details were not immediately apparent to me on inspecting the agreement. I'm not saying you're wrong. But I have a much more fundamental problem with these transactions, and that's what I'd like to get to now. And if we can start with what we say Lonman says the true state of affairs is, which is quadruple S5, page 229. So this is the statement of agreed facts, and the true state of affairs, according to Lonman, is in paragraph 2, if we can just scroll down. And we start off with 2.1. Western Metal Sales Limited is a company registered in Bermuda and a wholly owned subsidiary of Lonman plc. Prior to 1 April 2007, all of the products of Western Platinum Limited were marketed by Western Metal Sales Limited in terms of an agreement which provided for Western Metal Sales Limited to be paid a 2% commission on the turnover of Western Platinum Limited. This arrangement was changed by Lonman, and now the products of Western Platinum Limited are marketed by Lonman Management Services, that's Lonman PLC, in terms of an agency agreement concluded by Lonman PLC, Western Platinum Limited, EPL, and several other operating subsidiaries who are also governed by that agreement, but we don't need to concern ourselves with them. The agency agreement was signed on 12 June 2012, but has a commencement date of 1 October 2008 and governs the relationship between the parties with effect from 1 October 2008. In terms of the agency agreement, LMS, that's Lonman PLC, is the exclusive agent of WPL in relation to the sale of WPL products, and that would also mean all of the sale of EPL products because all of the EPL concentrate goes first to WPL. The treatment or purchase of third-party products by WPL, and the treatment by third-party refiners of any WPL products. WPL pays LMS a monthly commission of 2% on turnover for services provided by LMS under the agency agreement. The agency agreement contains a fairness clause, which obliges the parties in cases of unfairness caused by prevailing circumstances to attempt to agree on a reasonable course of action to remove the cause of that unfairness. On 5 July 2012, Western Platinum Limited, Western Metal Sales Limited, and Lonman signed an agreement described as the third supplemental agreement, which we'll call the transition agreement, to regulate the transition from a previous arrangement in terms of which Western Metal Sales had done the marketing to what we're told is the current, where Lonman does it. Now, in terms of the transition agreement, in respect of the period 1 April 2007 to 30 September 2007, the 2% marketing commission was payable by Western Platinum to Western Metals, that's the Bermuda company, but a fee of 50% of that commission was payable to Lonman by Western Metals. So half went to by Western Platinum, half went to Bermuda, half went to head office. In respect of the period 1 October to 30 September, half of the 2% was payable, let me go back to that early interim. The full amount goes to Bermuda. Bermuda in turn pays half of it over to head office. 1 October to 30 September, half of the 2%, that's 1%, is payable directly to Western Metals, payable directly to Bermuda. The other half is payable directly by Western Platinum to head office.
That's October 2007 to September 2008.
That's the second half of that's the 2008 financial year. With effect from the start of the 2009 financial year, that's September 2008, the 2% marketing commission was payable by Western Platinum, that's our local subsidiary, to head office.
That must surely be October.
Yes.
It is October.
2.9.2
It is October. That's an error. It's October. Now, consistent with the terms of the transition agreement, the audited financials of the Bermuda company, Western Metal Sales, and these I've seen and this I can confirm is correct, reflect the following. The full commission paid by Western was reflected in the turnover of WMSL, the Bermuda company, for the 2006 financial year, and the 50% fee payable to head office was reflected in the Bermuda financial statements under administration expenditure. So the full amount went in, half of it went out. In the next financial year, the 2007-8 financial year, only half of it went in, and that's reflected in the Western Metal Sales financials, the Bermuda financials. And in the financials of the Bermuda company following 2007-8, no payments are reflected. And the company effectively has no turnover at all. Now, before I get to my difficulties, I need to ask a couple of questions. First of all, why was it decided in 2007 to stop making these marketing commission payments to Bermuda and to start making them to head office?
I'm not sure exactly why, but I can give you what I think would be the reasons. A structure like this is normally set up to be optimal from a tax perspective. And if it's no longer optimal or economic and the cost of running this structure far exceed the benefits, then it would be decided to abandon that structure and go for something that makes more sense. And I suspect that's the logic that was applied at the time, but I can't give you the exact reasons.
So you're suggesting that there would have been a favorable tax regime in Bermuda up to 2007, but that might well have changed in around 2007. That's what you're speculating.
Yes.
Do you have any idea why this new arrangement was only reduced to a written agreement on 12 June 2012?
I have no idea.
Do you think it might have had something to do with the fact that Lonman was trying to issue a bond around that time and would be subject to due diligence investigations?
Well, I was on the London board at the time. I don't recall this coming up as an issue, so I don't know.
Well, let me put my problems to you.
You were busy trying to raise a massive bond. Would that have brought in its train due diligence investigations?
It would. Yes.
And the due diligence investigators would have come across the relationship with Western Metals and the various matters that are reflected in the paragraphs we just looked at. I take it one can accept that as a certainty.
Well, Chairman, I'm not absolutely sure if that is correct because remember in June, July, the company was still going to test the waters for a bond issue. It hadn't formally gone out and said, we want to issue a bond, who's interested? If I recall correctly, in July, just prior to the board meeting, which is around the 26th of July, the chief executive and the CFO went to bond customers in the U.S. to really test the waters. So it wasn't a formal process that had actually been embarked on because they came back from that and at the board meeting reported that it didn't make sense to pursue a bond issue for various reasons. One of them was the projected cash flow going forward of Lonman. And I think around August or September, then the idea of issuing a bond was abandoned and it was decided to go and do a rights issue. So I'm going by memory, but if I recall correctly, by July we were not ready in any way or form to actually issue documents for a bond issue, really to test the waters.
Chair, if I may be of assistance, I have an instructions from the Chief Legal Advisor to Lonman to say the reason for the lateness of that agreement was that Inkwala, for very
As going to Lonman Management Services, but the sales commission in its full amount is reflected as still going to Bermuda. It should have been 50% to Bermuda, 50% to head office. These are audited financial statements which were prepared for the special purpose of submission to SARS, as I understand it.
That's right, yes.
So can you explain why they inaccurately reflect this transaction?
This is for the period up to the end of 30th of September 2008.
That's correct.
Yeah. Can we go back to the document with the statement of facts? I just want to refresh my memory there.
Certainly. We can go back to that document. It's at page 229 in the same volume. And if we can scroll down to 2.9.2. Which deals with the 2008 financial year. So half of that 2% commission should have been payable to Bermuda, the other half to head office. What the financials show is that all of it was paid to Bermuda.
Yes, that's how the financials show it. Yep.
Can you explain why the financials show it inaccurately?
Well, the number is clearly correct. The entity to which it was sent is reflected incorrectly. Perhaps it was an error. I don't know. But it doesn't change the financials in terms of the actual movement of funds.
Chair, with respect, this may not be correct. If the agreement between the parties is that the agency agreement was only concluded in June, albeit with effect from 4 years earlier, as at 2008 financial year, this is not an error. This, in fact, shows the position then. The retroactive effect is only introduced according to this set of facts on the 12th of June 2012. There may have to be a restatement of the financials.
Well, maybe we can address Mr. Berger's suggestion by looking at the 2012 financials. They're at page 221 of this document. Because the 2012 financials cover the period after June 2012. Can we scroll down?
Page are we looking to? Oh, we've got the right page now.
Scroll one further. I'm look. Sorry, scroll up. Scroll up. What we're looking for is paginated page 30 of the original document. Scroll up. My reference is wrong. Let me get the correct reference.
Yes. That's 2007. You want 2012, is what I'm saying.
No, our problem is I think we're in the wrong file. We should be in quadruple S5.
Is this
221.
Right?
Can we scroll down? Sales commission paid to Western Metal Sales Limited. Now, by this stage, there should have been nothing paid to Western Metal Sales. $23 million, no sales commission reflected as having been paid to head office.
Well, I think it's an error in the sense that there isn't another line item that says sales commission paid to LMS. So it's probably referring to the sales commission paid to LMS, but referred to as Western Investment Sales.
Sorry, where's that other line item?
No, there isn't another line item, so I'm saying that it was a sales commission that was paid to LMS, but incorrectly reflected as being paid to Western Metal Sales.
So that's an error in the 2012 accounts?
I would guess, yes.
Now, we've tried to track these sales commissions through into the Lonman accounts themselves, because if the amounts were in fact paid to Lonman, they would ultimately have ended up in the Lonman accounts. We haven't been able to do so. It's partly because the group accounts give you very limited information about the company accounts, and this would have been a payment into the company from another group company. But I would welcome it if Lonman could provide us with an accounting trail which shows that these payments actually did end up in Lonman PLC, because from what we have looked at, we can't see any evidence of that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but we would like to see it.
Yeah, I guess the flow would be from WPL, EPL into LMS, and then from LMS into Lonman PLC. So we've got to look for them in the LMS.
Yes, that's what we want to see.
Okay, we'll try to.
Chair, I wonder whether I can suggest that my learned friend prepares at the end of the questioning a list of those queries which we must address. I'll have great difficulty following this. I got a copy of these financials on my BlackBerry this morning. I'm never good on a BlackBerry, but with financials I'm particularly poor. So I'm trying to keep up with the debate, and we would certainly assist. If there's a structured request, we have an opportunity to consider what this is all about and then respond to it.
Take it you'll comply with that request.
We will, Chair. I now want to move away from the financials to deal with housing, and we'll get back to some issues in relation to the financials and how they affect housing.
Right, before we do that, can I ask a question? These are sales commissions. Mr. Jamison told us that 85% of the platinum produced by Western Platinum and Eastern Platinum is sold to two customers. Is that right?
That's right. Lonman has two major customers.
Who are they?
Mitsubishi Corporation and BASF.
Sorry?
Mitsubishi Corporation
Yeah.
and BASF, a German company.
BASF?
Yes.
I see. Are these permanent, more or less long-standing customers?
These are long-standing customers, but the contracts are regularly reviewed. They may have a 2-year term or a 3-year term. At the end of that term, the conditions are reviewed, and depending on market conditions, sometimes we have, because you have a long-term contract, you pay a discount, or you give the customer a discount. That discount is renegotiated. The customer may be also charging you other fees for doing other things with the metal. Those kind of contractual conditions are regularly reviewed when these contracts come up for renewal.
I see. And so the marketing that's done was originally done by Western Metal Sales. 85% of it was done to these two customers.
Yes, Chairman, I'm not even sure if it was done during the time of Western Metal Sales or even prior to that. Lonman as a company has been going for many, many years. I don't know how long Western Metal Sales has existed. So I'm not sure if it was done during Western Metal Sales time. Before that, I can't tell you.
We've been told that Impala does all of its marketing in-house. Are you in a position to confirm or dispute that?
I'm not aware of how they do their marketing.
If they did, of course, then there wouldn't be a transfer out of the operational entity into another entity in respect to marketing services.
If they don't have a separate business entity in Impala that does it, yes. Sorry, having said that, I think Anglo Platinum has a separate business entity that market its platinum.
Terms of reference don't cover Anglo Platinum's activities.
Let's move to consider housing issues more directly. You'll accept, I assume, that living conditions in Nkaneng and the other informal settlements around Marikana are truly appalling.
Yes.
And I take it you've read Dr. Forrest's interim report.
I have not read the whole report, but the section on housing, section 5, I think it is, I have read.
And did you read chapter 2 that deals with living conditions?
I may have.
Do you
I did skim through the documents, so I may have gone through those sections. I've got a copy of the report, yes. If you refer me to it, I can.
Sorry, can I? You did tell us you'd been to Inkeneng.
Yes.
And you told us you weren't proud of what you saw.
Yes.
So whatever Dr. Forrest says about the conditions, you've got some of your own personal knowledge about how appalling the conditions are. You've agreed that the adjective appalling is appropriate.
Yes, Chairman, I could go even further than that. Within Lonman, we did commission a survey, a typical day in the life of a Lonman employee, and we covered employees coming from these different settlements, and we fully understand how difficult the conditions are under which they live.
Tell me, were you with the company when Mr. Mills was the CEO?
I joined in September 2007, and he departed in around September 2008.
I seem to remember having read somewhere that he actually spent a night in, I think it was in Inkeneng, but in one of the informal settlements.
He spent a night at the hostel.
Only at the hostel?
In one of the hostels, yes.
Now presumably Lonman has known since long before the shootings that a substantial proportion of its workforce is living in those conditions.
Yes, we've done many surveys, and we fully understand the demographics of how employees live.
Now, at quadruple S5 at page 366, you'll see a press statement that Lonman issued on the 24th of August 2016.
16?
Sorry, 2012. 16th of August.
2012.
2012 was the massacre. This was on the 24th of August. And it's a press statement called Lonman Seeks Sustainable Peace at Marikana. If we go over the page at 367, there's a little heading called Housing. And there Lonman say the following. We estimate that approximately 50% of people living in a 15-kilometer radius of our operations are housed in informal dwellings with little or no access to basic services, and suspect that this will include a significant number of our employees who choose not to spend their housing allowance on accommodation provided by the company, but to live elsewhere. This was a paragraph which I put to you was doubly disingenuous. First, Lonman did not suspect that a significant number of its employees were living in informal dwellings with little or no access to basic services. It manifestly knew that this was a fact. Would you agree with that?
Yes, we were aware that a significant number lived outside, yes.
But you knew it as a fact.
It says we estimate, so...
No, that's not what it says. It says we estimate that approximately 50% of people, that's the general population, living in a 15-kilometer radius of our operations, are housed in informal dwellings with little or no access to basic services, and suspect that this will include a significant number of our employees. You didn't suspect anything. You knew that a significant number of employees were living in those conditions.
Yes, my learned friend is not reading the sentence correctly, and what he put is with respect textually unsound.
Maybe Mr. Berger can explain why it's textually unsound.
No, as I understand it, the suspicion is that housing allowance is not spent on housing, but it is used for other purposes. I think that's the suspicion.
No, the suspicion is clearly that the 50% include a significant number of the employees.
The key word is include, so that the suspicion relates to the inclusion of a significant number of employees in those persons who are housed in informal dwellings with little or no access to basic services. I think that's the correct position.
But there's a second element of disingenuity about it which addresses Mr. Berger's concern, which is that the employees in question didn't choose to live in these squalid conditions as opposed to spending their housing allowance on accommodation provided by the company. There was no accommodation provided to them by the company. You accept that?
Well, if I may, the surveys we'd done, and you talked previously of the going rate for single-room accommodation and family accommodation, 800 rands and 1,200 rands respectively. Employees were receiving at that time, I would guess, in the order of 1,850 rands. After tax, say 1,500 rands. So I think this statement is also alluding to the fact that employees were not prepared to spend the full housing allowance on accommodation, which could be provided by either company or someone else.
What was your waiting list for housing for employees who chose not to live in the informal settlement but would like to live in company-provided accommodation?
Well, the waiting list in 2006 was around 5,000.
And 2012, when this statement was issued?
Well, I don't have a number, but I do know that 85% of the employees at that time preferred rental accommodation.
But the statement goes further. You see, the statement says they chose not to spend their housing allowance on accommodation provided by the company. Now, if I'd been an employee of the company as a rock drill operator, I might have been at Moinoi if I had been higher up in the company, but if I'd been an employee who was a rock drill operator, and someone spoke to me and said, "Okay, would you like a housing allowance, or would you like to a living out allowance? Would you like a living out allowance, or would you like accommodation provided by the company?" I'd say, "Well, what accommodation have you got for me?" And as far as I understand, from the evidence we've heard so far, you wouldn't have had any accommodation for me. You'd converted a lot of your hostels, which reduced your housing stock quite dramatically. You hadn't built houses. We heard that. So if I'd said, no, I would actually like to spend my housing allowance on accommodation provided by the company, please take me there and show me what you got. You wouldn't have been able to show me anything, would you?
True.
All right, thank you. Is this a appropriate stage for us to take the lunch adjournment?
It is, Chair.
All right, we'll take the lunch adjournment. We've got to be back, I'm afraid, at 1:30, which is going to mean that those of us who are going to enjoy the hospitality of a new silk will have to be fairly quick about it. We're now adjourned till 1:30.